Alrighty, folks, I think we're going to get started here. Um, I'm going to introduce Lisa Salon. Is that pronunciation close enough? I was hoping to send out a pronunciation guide to everyone, and then I ran out of time. So I've tried to put myself into the most situations to make myself look foolish and spare my poor volunteers. Lisa, author of the novel Shiva and the creator and editor of the anthology Desire, Women Write About Wanting, has been published in numerous anthologies, literary journals, newspapers, and magazines for the past 35 years. She has 2 grown children and currently lives in Savannah. One quick note before Lisa comes up and reads. Her books have not arrived today, unfortunately. The distributor is running a little slow. We try and get all of our books ordered in August, and sometimes, even if we get done really early, they do not make it here. We've been told hopefully they will be here tomorrow, and they will be present for her panel on, I do not have my brain on me, but yeah, Alzheimer's and literature. I kind of walked myself into that one, didn't I? I'm very excited to have Lisa here, though, and I would encourage everyone to come that day, purchase her book, and have her sign it. Alrighty, Lisa.
So I had some cards printed a while ago because people were asking about where they can find the book. So it's the cover of the book, some blurbs on the back of my website. So if you can't get it tomorrow, you can order it. If you want to order from an indie book store, it's Bookshop. It's all on my website. If you'd rather have a Kindle version, you can do that. So I'll put a few of these out here just so you can have them. Excuse me. I wanted to talk a little bit about the novel in general rather than just get up here and read from what is admittedly a hybrid and somewhat complicated book. I think other people feel this way, but it's no exaggeration to say that novels have changed my life. They've been pivotal to who I am as a writer and a woman, and have, aside from my children and my faith, given me the steadiest joy of my life. Supposedly, I taught myself to read at age 3, and I haven't stopped reading yet. I'm a fast reader with better than average comprehension and retention, although I will admit to having checked the same book out of the library on 2 or 3 different occasions. I've read voraciously, and I read across genre, but I mostly stick to literary fiction and thrillers for enjoyment. I also like to tell other people what to read. I'm naturally bossy, and I used to work in a bookstore, and my greatest pleasure was when people would come in and say, "Can you recommend something?" And I'd say, "Well, what do you like? Who do you like?" And then I'd recommend something, and then a week later they'd come in and say, "Okay, I finished that. What should I read next?" It was fabulous. My first and best love is literary fiction. And I think those are books that defy the genre. They're literary but not inaccessible. They may be domestic, but they aren't just for women. They are popular, but they're not chick lit. They may have a mystery or a crime, but that isn't the hook. They're historical and sometimes biography, but they read like a novel. The first hook is sometimes description, but it's almost always the character first, and I think that's really crucial. It's the kind of writing that makes you sit back and marvel at a sentence and then read that sentence again and again. And the kind of writing that when you finish the book, you wish you hadn't even started it because you wish you had the pleasure of reading it for the first time. Reading literature is supposed to promote empathy, or proven to promote empathy and compassion. It puts us in the lives of people who aren't like us. It introduces us to countries we haven't seen and most likely won't. It places the burden on us to immerse ourselves in the other, to the betterment of our own self, perhaps even the world. Studies have also shown that reading fiction predicts increased social acuity and a sharper ability to comprehend others' motivations. We need that very desperately. Fiction can alter our worldview. It can explain the notion of what a possible life is. It can suspend us in time. It can teach us new ideas. It can introduce us to artists and musicians we haven't even heard of. In the past couple of decades, there's been so many things vying for our attention, so many screens, so much noise, even in a sense, so many different genres. I didn't grow up with YA. I have nothing against it, but it's just things, there's just so much, and we become distracted from things that aren't news. We've become distracted from the people around us, and we don't talk to each other. So that is extremely disturbing, because if we're not talking, are we listening? I think fiction is a lovely window into strangers' lives. It's a moment stolen from a made-up character's insight. It's an eavesdropping on a conversation that has nothing to do with us. It's our settling in for however long, encouraged by the creators of the windows. But there is something else I think is true about writing fiction, and I think it's crucial. The best of fiction is beautiful words about terrible things. Think about that. Everyone in this room immediately thought of a writer they love, I bet. Toni Morrison, Charles Dickens, Doris Lessing, Chinua Achebe, Nabokov, my own favorite, Philip Roth. There are many of them. And they're truly gorgeous words. They're eloquent, exquisite sentences. Narrate tales of infirmity, betrayal, loss, pain, prejudice, slavery, cruelty. But the way they craft the stories, they bring enlightenment. They try to set the world right. They access their pain so we can see how we can endure our pain. I once had a lovely but uneducated woman ask me when I told her I was a writer if I just made stuff up out of my head. I do. In fact, I would posit that the largest part of my day, now that my children are grown, is spent inside my head, making up stuff. It doesn't all go on paper, but it all contributes to my need to tell a story. In the popular song, Walking in Memphis, nice Jewish boy Mark Cohn sings, "Now Muriel plays a piano every Friday at the Hollywood, and they brought me down to see her, and they asked me if I would do a little number. And I sang with all my might, and she said, 'Tell me, are you a Christian child?' And I said, 'Ma'am, I am tonight.'" I love this lyric because it gives me a frisson no matter how many times I've heard it. It speaks to me because it tells me that writing of all kinds, songs, even Bob Dylan did win the Nobel, although Leonard Cohen should have won it first, but anyway. It does allow you to be whoever you need to tell the story. And you are writing the words of the narrative. If you're lucky, your persona travels into the reader's head and they go along with you for the ride. It's a huge undertaking, and many of us are a little bit crazy. But I write both essays and fiction, and I think that's why I wanted to talk about fiction so much, is because I've published a lot of nonfiction on my mother's illness, which is Alzheimer's, she's dead. But what essays do is the writer creates the world from his or her point of view, their point of view only. And in the novel, instead of writing a memoir or using these essays, I've tried to reveal a world that is not really quite real. Um, it's a world created by grief, pain, and helplessness, but also by love and resilience. I have taken terrible things and tried to write beautiful words about them. I've also exercised the right of a writer to tell a tale from a distance of the made up, to try and see the whole story, even the part I'm not privy to, and create a fabric out of knowledge and space weaved together. I think a writer needs to stretch beyond a story if possible, while also getting to the truth, the terrible things. So my book has a double title. It says Shiva, a novel from memory. The title, the conceit of Shiva, which is the Jewish period of mourning the dead, is a metaphor. It's a description. It's also actuality. And it's also imagination. Because I think once memory is filtered through the mind of the writer, it becomes both true and less true. So here's the thing. What happened to my mother happened. How she reacted is how I remember her reacting. How I coped is how I remember coping. Yet there's a lot of stuff that didn't happen or didn't happen the way I say it did. There are people left out and others are softened. There are scenes composed from air and conversations that I wish had happened. The craft in creating a novel lies in fashioning a world, people with characters who may be better or worse than their real life selves. It lies in the handiwork, maybe a quilt sewn from a variety of fabrics that we hope is ultimately more appealing than the individual pieces. So Shiva's construction is extremely self-conscious, but in a way that gives the grief of losing someone over many, many years a shape that keeps that pain and mourning contained, I hope. As the wise Jewish prophet Hillel once said when trying to explain the Torah, the Jewish Bible, to a seeker, he said, "Treat thy neighbor as thyself. The rest is commentary." Here's a true sentence I wrote. I usually wear it on a locket around my neck, which my husband made for me, but it broke before I came. It says, "My penance for cutting out my mother's heart was to give her mine. The rest of Shiva is commentary." I'll read. The epilogue is prologue, which is a short introduction into the book. As I just mentioned, a spoiler alert, the character I'm writing about is dead. So that happens right off the bat. Every time we enter Mother's hospice room, my daughter Ivy throws herself across her grandmother's body. She is careful to sidle up to Mother slowly and then stretch her long, thin frame against a woman who was also once long and thin, but who has shrunk into half of herself. The two of them don't even take up all of the single bed. It surprises me, this passionate expression of love without fear. Ivy has always been somewhat fearful, delicate, anxious. As she grew older, the world at large shocked her, dismayed her, frightened her. She pushed against it as best she could, and when we entered Mother's room for the first time, it seemed as if everything Ivy had always feared dropped away. She is and always will be pure love and patience. For more than half of Ivy's life, her grandmother has been sick. And for more than a half dozen years, Mother hasn't even known who Ivy is, hasn't remembered that she has a grandchild. Yet Ivy's attachment to Mother is profound. Ivy's memory stops at all the years Mother had held her and played with her. Like Mother, she's okay with forgetting the past few years. Ivy lifts her head to remind me of the time that she, at 6, gave Mother a hairdo which consisted of a dozen tiny clips scattered around her grandmother's Jewish afro. Mother, who didn't love to play at all, allowed Ivy free rein. Mother's hair has gone so thin we can see her scalp through it. She's conscious of nothing, not where she is or who she's with. Who she's with on the bed. Ivy takes tiny breaks from her vigil. She runs and gets us food. She bends in yoga poses. She speaks to us in hushed tones, and then she's back on the bed with her grandmother as though it will be impossible for Mother to leave this earth as long as Ivy is connecting her to it. We spend 10 days like this, sharing shifts with my sister Erica, but feeling always as if none of us have left the room. It feels like a vigil without end and one that began so many years before. My mother's death, no matter how much expected, is still shocking. She is on her side, completely still, her face turned to the window. Mother's elegant Roman nose, her profile worthy of an ancient coin, rests against the pillow. The wrinkles that once rattled her cheeks are smoothed as if ironed. She looks 10 years younger. Mother has been practically silent for a few years, save for the intense keening and screaming when the attendants in her nursing home used to bathe or dress her. But this particular silence, the quiet before she leaves forever, is profound. It sucks the air from the room and we can hear nothing. No cars, no people walking down the hall, no chattering outside our door. Most of us in the room speak quietly, in a near whisper, as if Mother can hear us. And who knows, perhaps she can. The only ones who speak normally are medical staff, the doctor who pops in to assess progress, and the nurses who administer Mother's cocktail of pain and antipsychotic meds every 4 hours. As soon as Mother's legs begin to move restlessly under the covers, a movement that reminds me of her hospitalization 4 years ago, when she got up from her bed and ran down the hall all those years ago. They strapped her in restraints, and she never walked again. Ivy whispers things the rest of us can't hear, a rolling litany like davening. My mother's sister Hannah and I take turns sitting at Mother's head and watching her breathe. Erica stands at the back of the room for a few minutes after her shift ends. My husband Paul looks helplessly on. As a doctor, he knows what's coming. When she breathes her last, he will confirm it and then get the hospice doctor in to confirm it again. I stroke Mother's head, her cheek, the hand that lays on the top of the blanket, and I say, "You can go now." I don't mean it, and I do mean it, but I don't like to say it. Thank you. I've been told this is a tough book to read. I will tell you, honestly, it was a tough book to write. But I had a very complicated relationship with my mother. She was quite ill mentally and an alcoholic. And when she got sick, everything had to change. So I, to simplify things, decided to honor the biblical imperative of honor your mother and father. And so we got through it together for a long, long time.
Questions, maybe two parts. I'm really curious about what your process was as you wrote the book. Did you kind of start at the beginning and bring it to the end, or were there other essays that you wrote and kind of cobbled together? Because you know, as you say, you're writing from memory. And I'm just curious about how you...
Well, I think I don't write linearly any, except in essays. That they will often come in order. But this book was written over a period of a dozen years, and she was sick for 15. So I'd write sections, then as things changed in her illness, I'd write other sections, and no, it was not. I wrote the epilogue as prologue after she died, obviously, but the rest of the book was pretty much finished. It's a circular book. It's not, and Mary and I are going to talk more about this tomorrow, but it's not, time does not happen in an orderly fashion because two things, death doesn't happen in an orderly fashion and grief doesn't happen in an orderly fashion. So the book shifts around in time and moments and ends quite differently than you might expect. But yeah, it was complicated to write because I wanted to write, as I say, the truth, but I didn't want it to be a memoir. I wanted to feel like somebody sitting on a cloud watching the parts. That's just sort of the task I set myself.
The second part of the question was, when did it occur to you that this was Sheila? When did that realization?
Oh, it always started out it was always a book. Yeah, I mean, I knew that I'd written all these essays. In fact, y'all can read one I published in the New York Times that was very difficult and very honest and brutal about our relationship. But I had already been writing the book for several years before I published that piece. I always knew I wanted to write a book about this process. As soon as she got sick, I sort of thought, okay, I'm gonna pay attention and figure out what to do with this. If you mean Shiva in terms of the mourning period, I just think that was a lucky strike for me to figure out, oh, well, yeah, that conceit will really organize the book in ways that, and it's explained, that the elements of Shiva for people who aren't Jewish or don't know about it, it's explained, it's not vague. It's a 7-day period, so there's 7 chapters, and there's also 7 sort of, well, I'll tell you, so there's 7 things you're commanded to carry out when you're grieving with somebody. So you sort of have to acknowledge the heart-wrenching pain of grief and loss. And then there's the ceremony of the washing of the hands. When you go into the house to mourn, like in many Jewish rituals, you wash your hands. Then there's a meal, the condolence meal, which is brought in by people. And then you tell stories about the person. And then you recite the Kaddish, which is the prayer for the dead. And then you examine your own place in the world as it relates to the person who died. And the imperative when somebody dies is you're supposed to fill their gap. So this was my way of filling the gap left by her, was to tell her story and to try to understand her and try to make her, give her a slightly more beautiful life than she ever had, but also to let her know that I forgave her, which I could never tell her, but it's out there, and for people who believe that the stuff out there penetrates, then that's how that works for me. Yeah.
Well, I wanted to know if she was ever aware or conscious that you were writing the book.
No, my relationship with my family in writing is like many writers. They didn't want to know that. So Perhaps if I've been on a huge commercial bestseller, they might have, but no, not even that. My father always just said, "So how much you make for this article? How much you make on this book?" What? Daddy. But no, because what happened, and it's I don't want to spoil the book, but what happened is when her diagnosis happened, she immediately gave up. And so there wasn't time. And the conversations I had with her were very sort of practical in a sense. What are we going to do? Where are we going to have lunch? Can I get you this? Can I do this for you? Oh, look, your grandchildren are coming to visit. Let's go to your sister's house. There are some moments that are in the book, but there wasn't kids, I'm writing a book, because it wouldn't have mattered anyway. The next day she would have forgotten that. So,
But the importance is that you know something that others, but it's only your experience.
I hope. I think that's what Mary and I are going to talk about tomorrow. I think fiction does serve that purpose. I also think, help books that help also. I have several friends who tell me that this is hard to read, but it's touched them because they went through a similar experience. But it's not just about the grief of losing a parent. It's about coming to peace with a terrible relationship by caring for the person who's died, which was a choice I made. My sister didn't make the same choice, so yeah.
And she had, she was at home and she was drinking a lot, and then as it progressed, I think I remember you all put something else in her glass, and she just kind of forgot about the drinking. Did you feel like, it almost felt like in some instances she was nicer?
Oh, she was much nicer. Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, she was. Well, I don't know. Yeah, it is. I had hoped she'd be nicer my whole life. But, and people do undergo dramatic changes in personality often. And a lot of people said other fathers start swearing and attacking people and being an ass and stuff. And Mom she's got nicer and nicer until she stopped speaking. It wasn't serious niceness, but she was very amenable. Not a lot of acting out. She'd done most of my life. So yeah, it was interesting to see what the brain did for her. But yeah, she was much easier to be with because she lost a lot of the anger and the fury that she lived with.
And I just had to think that it must have been so difficult and complicated that you have this very complex relationship with your mom, but then she's second and there you are, and you're going to be taking care of her for, for a long time. Did you, and it sounds like you made that conscious decision
I did.
at the beginning.
Yeah.
Did you ever regret that, or did you ever say,
No, it's just what you're supposed to do. Jews believe that heaven and hell exists here, and you create it by how you treat people and how you're then remembered. And if you're terrible a man, the stories are not going to be very nice. And I just think you're supposed to do the work now, and you don't get a reward, but that this is your chance to do the work, and you can choose not to, but I chose to. Anybody? Oh, sorry, yeah.
So going through this experience of documenting it, did you find that it sort of changed the dynamics that you had with your children?
Oh, God, yes.
And so could you maybe speak on that a little bit and how that played out? Was there resentment from them?
No, but you
Okay.
probably don't want me to be as honest as I'm going to be, which is I sat my kids down and I explained my suicide plan. So,
Yes, I have a similar, yeah.
and I sent them several articles that I'd read about people making that decision. And they didn't want to hear it. And I said, I don't care if you want to hear it. And my husband too, I said, I am not going to collapse it on myself and have you watch me do that for 15 years.
Right.
it's cruel. And all I could think of every time I looked at my mother was, you were so beautiful. You were so smart. You were so electric. You know, for all your issues, you were an amazing draw. People wanted to be around you. You were just, but that's Scott Fitzgerald character. And so, and I thought, I would really like my kids to remember me as not like that. And also, so 25 years ago, I lost my best friend to cancer, and I watched her die. And so I've been thinking about it, and I just think, no, I want a plan, and I will make a plan. Like Hendy Bloom's husband, she's a writer, his husband got Alzheimer's, and he said, I want to die, and she arranged it for him, which is a gift. But it was much harder on us than it was on her, and I felt like we got the lesson without it having to go on interminably. It was an incredibly long period of time, and I think she would have been horrified if she'd been able to see herself. She was unrecognizable. She's very vain. I think I really pissed her off. So yeah, I did sit down with the kids. You know, they're probably going to pretend I never said that, but I do bring it up now and then. Yeah, I do. I'm very honest with my children. And yeah, so this is not going to be. And it was hard for them. They would go up and visit her with me, not nearly as often as I did, because they were in school and then working, and it was so hard on them. So yeah, I did. But they were not resentful at all. They were amazing. I have amazing children. They knew we didn't have, my mother and I had a good relationship, but they got it. My time was never questioned. They were little kids. They weren't babies. So, anyway, I'm going to sit my copy out there if you want the thumb throat, decide if it's something you're interested in buying. Put these cards out there, and if you decide to do that's great. If you come to Mary and my panel tomorrow, we're going to talk about the differences between writing about a disease, specifically Alzheimer's, in fiction versus nonfiction, which I think will be fun. We've had some great talks. So it's really not a completely downbeat novel. It's hard. It's hard, but there's a lot of love, a lot of resilience, a lot of redemption, a lot of knowledge. You can't go through something, you could, of course you can, anything can happen. Most decent people can't go through something like this without being changed. And that's kind of what fiction is supposed to do. It's supposed to change you. So, and I don't resent a second of what I did with her at all. It was, I mean, you know, it's just like, if your kid was sick, or you just do what you do, right? Women, that's what we do. So, yeah, I mean, it's also, I think it's good writing. And I like to read good writing. I like to read good writing. It makes a friend of mine said that she put the novel on several times and stopped, like I've done with people. And I was like, oh, that was my goal. That was my goal. It's really meaningful because I'm one of those writers that agonizes over every word. Each word has to have a reason for being there. It's a different way. Other people don't write like that. But this was. It was a challenge to put everything that I knew as a writer, as a woman, as a caregiver, as a mom, into something which I'm very pleased with.